In sub-Saharan Africa, people and culture are inseparable, since there is no denial of the fact that what makes any human society is its culture. The culture of a people is their identity, as it records them due recognition. Alan Donovan arrived in Africa on July 4, 1967, with the US State Department as a relief officer during the Nigerian Biafra War. 2 years later, he resigned his post and relocated to Sahara Desert to Nigeria with the passion for conserving the rich African heritage.
My first job was to evacuate Americans because of the war. During that time, I met several artists, two of whom are with us tonight as honored guests. Chief Nikki 77, who did all these wonderful Adiri batiks. She's revived a lot of the textile industries of Nigeria. She has several hundred people trying to revive this wonderful indigo-dyed art of Adiri, like you see behind me.
Alan embarked on collection and exportation of Pan-African crafts to the Western world.
I've always been drawn to the creativity in Africa that's real, and I think the Africans provided more to modern art than any other community on earth. Picasso and all the artists that have the so-called modern art, they drew it all from Africa, not part of it. It was all inspired. They were doing portraits of cows and queens, and when the camera came along, they were afraid that the camera was going to replace them and they wouldn't have any market. So they started looking inside for a new way of expressing art, and they found it in Africa.
During his tours around the continent, he encountered the magnificent mud mosque of the Mali and other examples of African pre-colonial mud architecture that stirred his passion. He arrived in Kenya in March 1970. Alan spent several months with the African of Northern Frontier District of Kenya, studying their rich divergent nomadic lifestyle of the Turkana, Samburu, Gabra, and Rendile, just to name a few.
And I was so fascinated by the wonderful designs they made. Every woman carved her own containers, beautifully executed, copied from gourds, but they're not gourds. They were carved of wood with a graceful top. And I was just amazed at how they used everything in their environment, in the harsh desert, to make beautiful designs. They would melt down all the old cooking pots, make beautiful earrings, bracelets. So I decided to sell my bus and to buy one of everything.
In October 1970, Alan held his first exhibition of art and material culture from Turkana and other nomadic communities of northern part of Kenya, which was an eye-opener of African culture to the world.
And the only African who was there was Joseph Murumbi, who was the former vice president and the first foreign minister of Kenya. And he came up to me after my lecture and said, you know, would you go back to Turkana and make a collection for me? And I said, yes, I think that's a very good idea for somebody of his stature to want to preserve and protect his culture.
It was then he met Joseph Murumbi, the former vice president of Kenya and Africa's most notable private collector, who elevated Alan's passion a notch higher. What followed was a series of Pan-African festivals and trade fairs organized by Alan across the African continent, Nigerian taking a bigger pie of this play.
I've had exhibitions for the Nigerian artists. Over the past 40 years, I've had more than 12 exhibitions. I've showed their work all over the world.
The festivals were rocked with showcasing African fabrics, designs of African heritage jewelry, African models and fashions. The African Renaissance Show was first staged in South Africa for the first African Telecoms Conference in May 1998. Sponsored by the government of the Republic of South Africa and the International Telecommunication Union. For Alan, it was the biggest grip of his art conservation work.
I learned how to melt down the cooking pots and make the jewelry in clay molds. And I decided I wanted to learn to make jewelry. So I went down to Mombasa. I met a Peace Corps volunteer from the United States, from South Carolina. He'd set up a workshop called Bombolulu. It's still there, but it was very different then. At that time, Bombolulu was the name of a jewelry line that he designed out of local components using copper as the base metal, with seed pods, nuts, banana fiber, anything that was available locally. And he made a beautiful line of jewelry with his staff.
With passion in conserving African culture, Alan extended his tours to the Horn of Africa, Southern Kalahari Desert, and Sahara Temperate Zone, which was not left out objectively to collect the remaining traces of the artifacts from the indigenous communities.
Since that time, I've made millions and millions of jewelry items that have been exported from Kenya. I set up workshops in India and Bali. I did a line of jewelry for the large store Banana Republic stores that is worldwide. I did jewelry for them for several years.
Joseph Murumbi made a bold move in conserving our heritage, and at this point, Alan was contracted to collect the artifacts that were vanishing at a lightning speed.
That day he said, "It's my dream to make a Pan-African center where people visiting the country and local people can see the creativity of the continent, where artists can show their works and everybody can share in the whole of Africa," because he was a Pan-Africanist from the beginning. He thought Africa should be one. So I went back to Turkana. I spent another few months with them collecting. And during that time, they used to give me full sets of crocodile teeth when they would kill crocodiles. I'd go on crocodile hunts with them. And we would string necklaces from the crocodile teeth, dik-dik toe bones to make belts.
The burning desire to expose the endowed African heritage could not stop Alan from reaching all corners of African continent. He opened up various branches of exhibition stalls across the world.
We went through 11 cities with a bus, a load of two lorries, and filled with plants, with musical instruments, with costumes, fashions, and murals to turn every one of the hotels we did shows into Kenya, with scenes of Kenya, Mount Kenya, the beaches, the desert. And we had 2 elephants on that trip that would travel through the main city centers. And we would then announce the opening of the festival with those 2 elephants. And those elephants followed us through the 11 cities.
His efforts almost hit a dead end. At some point, the government came crashing what Alan and Murumbi had built through their sweat for all these years.
Our gallery burned down in 1976. It burned to the ground. We lost everything, the workshops, the stores, everything. And he sold part of his collection to the government to make money so we could rebuild. The government came back to him and said, "Can we have your house? Can we buy your house? We don't have any place to put this collection." He loved his house in Muthaiga. He loved his trees and indigenous gardens. And he said, "Yes, on one condition, that you turn it into the Murumbi Institute of African Studies." He went to the UNESCO, and he asked UNESCO to please provide funding for a hostel, for a library, for a kitchen, and to buy the adjoining property, which was even bigger than the plot his house was on, to make a real Institute of African Studies, which is so much needed in Africa. And so instead, the government allowed the house to deteriorate until we had to remove everything and put it in the basement of the present National Archives. Murumbi had gone down to Maasai land to build a house with his forefathers, the Maasai. And when he came back after a fall, he was evacuated from his house. He heard that they destroyed his indigenous trees, And he went in his wheelchair to his old house in Muthaiga, and he saw that they'd torn down the entire house. They'd cut down all his indigenous trees. They'd ripped up his indigenous gardens, and they were building 2 horrible modern houses on this plot. And that killed him. He died shortly after that.
In 1990, Murumbi departed from this world, leaving Alan with no shield to protect him from the sharp jaws of the government.
When he died, he left in his will that he wanted to be buried as close as possible to his mentor and best friend Pio Gama Pinto, who was buried in the cemetery in City Park. The government claimed that the cemetery was full, so they buried him alone in the City Park. They gave some money towards funding a memorial for him there, but the money was stolen, and people tried to dig him up several times. They would try to dig up his grave because they thought there would be valuables in there. I had to place huge boulders on his grave to keep them from digging it up. Then when his wife died in 2000, she was buried there. Her grave was completely vandalized. I had to place boulders on that. Nobody did anything about it.
Other than collecting and exhibiting African heritage to the entire world, Alan also nurtured talents. He identified the potential interest in the late Ayub Ogada, forming the iconic African band that traversed the world showcasing the rich African songs.
Who started the African Heritage Band with me, the most famous musician to come out of Kenya in all time, Ayub Ogada, who played his Neotiti around the world, started the African Heritage Band with me, traveled through many, many countries of the world with my African festival, which you'll see tonight, the models, the musicians, the dancers, the acrobats.
The African Heritage House, which overlooks the great steel plains of Nairobi National Park, is both a trove of continent's aesthetic richness and mausoleum of its extinct wonders.
1972, we opened African Heritage, the first Pan-African gallery in Africa. So I had to go to 20 African countries, meeting artists, collecting artifacts, crafts, textiles. Some of these I bought at that time. And so that's how African Heritage started, which was the most successful gallery in Africa. I got several awards for the best gallery in Africa, African Heritage.
Inside is a garden courtyard, 9 distinct rooms and 600 pieces of art and craft, reflecting a lifetime's immersion in Africana as a collector, dealer and patron. Every detail is carefully arranged, from the sinks of Moroccan brass to a bathtub of Swahili plasterwork.
The wall is made of coral stone, also from Lamu. On this other part, we have a headrest. This is from the Karamojong of Uganda, and it's 2 functional pieces. It has a headrest with they sleep on it to protect their hairdos, and then you can turn it over and sit on it as a stool.
Here are appliqued masquerade costumes from the Igbo of Nigeria. You wouldn't get this anymore.
Ibeji dolls from the Yoruba of Nigeria. They've been carved for children of multiple births, like twins, quadruplets. And one of the twin dies, the mother must have one of these carved out, and they are fed like the living twin. So that's why you see their noses get ripped off.
The agitated Alan says cultural erosion has buried the African heritage to the deep graves. For instance, the wooden grave maker from Madagascar are all gone, as the ceremonial daggers from the Bakuba people of the Congo remain untraceable.
Most of those ceremonies that they've been documenting have vanished, disappeared, gone. So nobody could ever do it again. So we have their 17 books as reference and proof of the African past, the African glory, which nobody remembers anymore.
Donovan is deeply ambivalent about the Western influence on Africa, which he blames is part of the decline of traditional African arts.
And Africans don't even remember that now, what they contributed to the world. And these textiles, they're all dying. Do Africans try to revive them? No, they buy imported. So do I. This is made in China. They buy imported cloth from China because it's cheaper. They have used clothing from the United States. Do they try even to remember their heritage? No. I've been here 50 years. If I go back to the cultures that I first saw 50 years ago, I cry. I cry. I can't believe it. I can't believe the Fulani who are the best embroidery in Africa. The best jewelry. Now they wear cast-off clothes. It's nothing left.
The Nigerian chief of Yoruba community, Muraina Oyelami, says the gap between traditionists and the so-called elite is broadening day after the other, eating into African heritage. Chief Oyelami says African heritage is on the brink of collapse as Africans are in the haste of adopting Western culture and language.
No, language is the very first thing that they want to kill. And when you have no language, you are nobody. You are not a human being. Language, once you know the language, then you know about the culture. But see, it's sad. It's sad that nowadays the elites when they have their baby, the first thing they learn is how to speak English. And they make their mother tongue becoming the second language. And this is a pity, but that is changing, and it is changing rapidly now. People are now aware that without your language, you have no culture, and you are nothing.
But I probed further how the Niger men and women have for decades kept their cultural heritage roots flourishing.
We are not the best, but we are working hard. And people now even prefer using the traditional attire to take to the house office, you know. In the former times, you only have to wear a three-piece suit if you want to work in the bank. But nowadays, you can have your shorts and buba. We call it buba, not as big as it, but something like I wear underneath.
Nigeria has a fashion week. They have African week. They have African fashion week. They have Nigerian fashion week. So, and they are using the textile to do the fashion. So now we will say we have achieved our heart desire, but it's still indigenous textile that we love the government to create an industry that can be printing some out so everybody will be able to wear it, including the house help and the gardener, so they will be able to buy a dire and wear it because it's wearable art. It's not just ordinary art.
But will the continent of Africa be able to conserve the fragile traces of the withering fabrics of culture?
In some areas, yes, you have like this, the northern part and the southwestern part mainly. They still adhere to some traditional norms and tradition. But in places like Lagos, you have it's a cosmopolitan, you know, people from all over, just like Nairobi, you know. But there are certain fundamental that has to be maintained. There's certain tradition that has to continue. So what you say, how you say it, your relationship with your fellow neighbor, the way you dress, what you make out of your food, your nation food, very nutritious and organic. So these are the things. If you don't have that culture, you will lose everything.
Chief Nike Okundaye, born in 1951 in Nigeria, is one of the internationally renowned female designers and artists. She was brought up amidst the traditional weaving and dyeing practice in her native village Okidi in western Nigeria.
I started the art of textile in 1958 with my great-grandmother, because I was born into the craft. My great-grandmother is the head of all the weavers in the village, and I'm a fifth-generation textile artist. That is how they pass knowledge of art to kids in those days. Whatever your parents do is what they teach you. And that is how I learned from my parents.
Specializing in cloth weaving, dye making, indigo dyes, and leather, Okundaye has utilized the art in preserving the art text through training the young, not just in Nigeria, as well as overseas.
That is why we are always coming to Allah, because he has been a big promoter of African art and fashion in the whole 54 Africa country. He doesn't only promote Kenya, but he promotes the whole 54, going to Madagascar, Nigeria. He's always there for us, and he gives us an inspiration, even though he's a white man, but his heart is black.
Chief Oyelami says weak policies or absence of policy on cultural heritage conservation has seen the continent's rich heritage either poached by foreigners or watered downstream by autocratic leaders. But Nigeria has opened a new page.
Nigeria are trying their own way to promote, especially the young people. You know, there is art auction in Nigeria. There is art gallery. We have, in Lagos alone, we have 45 art galleries in Lagos alone. Then throughout Nigeria, we have 50,000 Nigerian artists who exploit their work in different ways. Some is mixed media, some is painting, some you will be seeing on display at the Intercontinental. So Nigeria has really tried every country. The first thing that comes, if they want to talk about any country, they will say art and culture. And that is why we are making sure that we carry on and hand over to the younger generation.
Nike has used her international success to launch a cultural festival in Nigeria, which offers free training to cover 150 young artists in visual, musical, and performing art, one of which is the largest art gallery in West Africa, comprising over 7,000 artworks.
Chief Muraina is one of the senior Oshobo artists. These are artists who are already inborn. They are born and they create their work. And when people come and they see the work, they bring it. Maybe sometimes they send their work to the museum, different museum. Their work is at the Smithsonian and different museums, including my own work. And that brings awareness to the African art in our own society.
Amos, the curator, moves us around the gallery, showing us reserved pieces of African art from different communities.
Entry of the house. The door is the only door not of Africa. This is from Kashmir in northern India. And inside on the door to the house, we have a picture, a sculpture. This is by Expedito Mwebe from Uganda. This is made of wrist knives and cowbells given to him by Alan Donovan. This has represent the three singers of African heritage called Musically Speaking, Joy Mboya, Susan Matiba, and Susan Kachukia. Okay, this is Kente cloth, the most famous of African textiles. It is from the Ashanti of Ghana and it's woven for men, for the male royalty of the Ashanti in Ghana. It is quite different from other clothes because this is hand woven, unlike other weaves from Africa. This Kente cloth is woven using hand looms, and that's why they have narrow looms, unlike others that has wide looms. This features the King of Benin. It's a copy from the Benin plug. The original is what we have on the poster ahead. The Kingdom of Benin was burned down by the British in 1897. All the bronzes, all the ivory, they were taken out of Benin, and they are now in display in museums all around the world. And the Benin plug is now in the New York Metropolitan Museum. All these are by Ogun, discarded by the blacksmiths who worship the god of iron, Ogun from Yoruba, Nigeria.
Alan's efforts in conserving the cultural heritage has made him win several global awards.
Well, my first award, I think, was from the Pan-African Broadcasting and Heritage Association in South Africa. I won the award, the first award for the best gallery in Africa. And also I won an award for me personally for 30 years of leadership in the arts of Africa. That was my first 2 awards. Then I got another award from South Africa for the festival as the best festival in Africa. That's what you'll see tonight.
Alan is a disheartened man, alleging the government has been the biggest player in cultural erosion of our heritage, attributing to poor governance, ethnic violence, crime spiraled out of control, made it dangerous to conservation of cultural heritage. The vice runs across African states, of which Chief Oyelami raises his fears of the falling pillars of African heritage.
I have a place where I do occasional workshops, music workshop, percussion. I don't want to make musicians out of them. No, I want to use that tool to introduce them to the historical past of their forefathers. While drumming a particular piece of drum, that I will tell them the story of that particular piece of music. Is it for religious purposes, or is it ritual, or is it ceremonial, or is it social? So they know different types of pieces we play and the stories that go with them. So they learn something, not just the music, not just the percussion, but something about their culture and tradition.
Alan says his love for Africa is like a lifetime spring of holy water.
I love this country. And I love Africa.
For over 50 years, Alan has strived to conserve the African heritage, traversing the 54 countries of African continent. Now the African Heritage Gallery hosts artifacts from various communities across the continent. For Culture Quest, I'm Levis Msumba.